Welcome back to the Mom Files. Today, we are diving into cutting toxic family ties. Now, this could be for a lot of different reasons and bring up a bunch of different feelings for you and even people you are having struggles with. And so, just to kind of really dive in, why is this such a taboo, hard to talk about topic, especially for moms and women? And I think part of it is, again, like this cultural family pressure around, like, oh, but they're family, like, you're just supposed to kind of, we talked about in the last episode, they're your elders, like you just should respect them, things like that. But I always say, toxic is toxic and you shouldn't have to experience being treated a certain way just because someone is related to you. You deserve to feel loved, respected, and like your feelings are being met too. And so I think that's also important to note that family is not always safe or healthy, but we can sometimes be taught that way. I don't know. Hav, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's 100%. I think it's kind of every culture that I know of anyway, where I mean, you hear it all the time, right? Blood is thicker than water, which, and we could get into like how that saying is used wrong. But I think it's a big, like, that's a great example of how society basically, like family can never go away because they're related to you. You can't get rid of them. They're the
Right.
same blood as you or whatever. In all reality, like, yeah, my family has, like, the same genetics as me, but that doesn't mean that, they can't do things that aren't toxic or I'm a firm believer in creating your own family, and friends can be more family than family can be because a lot of times they take that for granted and, "Well, blood is thicker than water. You should forgive me for this and that and whatever." But I think we should kinda get out of that
Mhm.
if we can?
100%. Yeah. I think it can be really difficult to face family with toxic behaviors, especially like you can, like, a lot of times we do still love them or have love for
Right.
them. And so it can be hard to disconnect. And so when, what do you do when a connection, no matter how close, becomes toxic, especially if it's affecting your kids and yourself, your marriage life, that type of thing. And so I think let's dive into it. I know first, let's just start off by discussing that we aren't talking about like normal family conflict. Like all families fight, people argue, feelings get hurt. That's normal. Like this. And honestly, and it doesn't matter if it's a family member or a partner, a child, or friends, like there's normal family relationship conflict. But
Yeah.
then sometimes I think that this is a little deeper than that. Like things that like manipulation or not respecting your boundaries, like doing nasty things that are beyond a normal disagreement. For example, on my end, like I've had some things where people just made up really terrible lies and trying to pit each other against each other. And so for me, it came in different ways that I felt like were deeper than just like normal family stuff. Like, so I think we can kind of get into it. Like, what are signs of toxic behavior? I know, like, I can think of manipulation, gaslighting, lack of boundaries, disrespect. I don't know. Is there any that I missed that you can think of?
I don't think so, because I think you made a great point, like, there's a disagreement and then there's toxic behavior.
Right.
There's not necessarily seeing eye to eye with somebody, and then there's lack of boundaries
Right.
or, like you said, manipulation,
Mhm.
gaslighting, um, I
Yeah.
mean, just, like, straight just straight going out of your way to make somebody's life a living hell. Like, there's definitely levels to toxic behavior for sure, but I
Right.
think those are definitely the main ones that I would call out, and just like you said, differentiating that, like, an argument or a disagreement or having different political views, as long as you can
Mhm.
respectively figure those things out and, like, be
Right.
around each other without making each other feel, like, out of place or
Yeah.
unsafe, then once
Yeah.
you feel unsafe and feel like you aren't protecting your peace or you can't, like, there's anxiety going into it or fear, stuff like that, that's when I think there's, like, a real clear indicator that the person that you're worried about is toxic and not just, somebody that you maybe don't, like, get along with very well.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree because obviously I've had disagreements with, like, my parents or, like, even Hav and I, we don't agree on everything, but I'm like, that's really different, like, conflict than, like, if I was blatantly trying to bring Hav down.
Yeah, well, like,
Like,
we
secretly.
could disagree about something, but I'm not gonna undermine you with other
Right,
people or talk negatively about you or spread rumors. I wouldn't spread any rumors, but, like, rumors that especially that are untrue,
right,
like, exactly, like, I could hey, you know, I disagree with I don't know, I'm trying to think, but yeah,
yeah,
100%. I mean, we live together, right? There's
right,
disagreements about, like, personal space and
yeah,
stuff like that, but that's, like, a difference of opinion and, like, whatever, but once boundaries were set, it's like, okay, your boundary might not work exactly with what I want my boundary to be, but, like, we worked on it
right.
together, you know?
I just yeah, and I think that's a good example, and so to kind of, like, tag on my end, something that is a little, I would say, more gaslighting and kind of like a disrespect, and I think they
Mhm,
kinda come together, but I personally have put up multiple boundaries of cutting people off in my family due to awful behavior. Not just awful behavior, but no change behavior, absolutely 0 ownership to their actions, like, it's to me, it was a multiple things that kind of led up to, them continuing to cross the line as if nothing
mhm,
happened, and so with that, as they have no acknowledgement and they found it was time to like really look at those and be like, okay, this is beyond a normal conflict. This is really
mhm.
like toxic and it's time to move on. Like sometimes you just can't fix something and sometimes it's not worth your time and energy to fix something.
I think that's a great point of also in this discussion is maybe sometimes you could put in energy to try to fix some things, but
Mhm.
also sometimes it's not for lack of better words, not worth your time or energy, and it's better to just cut off. I know a lot of things I think gaslighting is a really like, maybe one of the most difficult things to cut off because it oft by definition, makes you second guess yourself, right? But, like, manipulation and coercion and stuff like that can be a little bit more clear to see, not saying that it's, like, easier by any means, but I think for me, because 'cause you've had like you said, you've had clear, like, people disregarding your boundaries to manipulating people around you to trying to gaslight you, things like that. Things that I've experienced are a little bit more about, like, the anxiety that it causes me to walk into a situation or having to avoid, um, bringing my family around there's certain things I know mine was like, my main example is a little bit less drastic and stuff, and I didn't end up cutting him out of my life, but I know a big one for me was my dad and, like, being like discussions like not necessarily as a father and daughter that like it sounds like it could be a lot worse than it was, but using me kind of as a therapist and then disagreeing with my choices of who I decided to make a family with and stuff, and we got past that pretty quickly, but the anxiety that came with, like, knowing that if I went to a family occasion, that my life was just that day was just gonna be ruined because the disagreements with my dad, and a lot more that goes into that, but I definitely think a part of it that we, I guess, didn't say is, like, the anxiety, even if it's not they're not clearly, like, gaslighting you or manipulating you, the disrespect or lack of boundaries for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, and I think you made a couple good points. One, I totally agree with the gaslighting because I think not only does it make you second guess yourself, but they can turn it in a way that makes other people be like, "Well, why aren't you forgiving them?" Or why, like like they turn it on you from other people. But I also think you made up a great point that with the anxiety, like that is definitely a sign that it might be time to step back. And so I think
Mhm,
that's something we should dive into is kind of like, let's talk about, what are things that to step back? Because there is an array. Sometimes it is hard to recognize that you're being gaslit or manipulated, or maybe you think you are, but you're not sure. So there's other things that can affect you that
mhm.
could also mean that you need to take a step back. Like Hob said, like the feeling super anxious, or maybe you feel guilty or scared or just grief, like, every time you're talking to them, you're like, "Okay, I need to walk away." I don't know, Hob, do you have any others? Sorry, I came off to a
Yeah.
blank.
No, I think that and, like or also a big one I feel like is the fear of your child being treated the same way you were. I think a lot of us, or at least for me, I've seen that, like, the parents in my life have had the ability to see around the way they were maybe as parents, that they didn't like the way that they parented, and they're a lot better with their grandkids. But I think there's also a lot of grandparents, uncles, aunts, friends, cousins, whatever, who you might have had a relationship before with that were surpassing boundaries or manipulating or whatever, but it didn't may not have like felt like as big of a deal when it was just you. But now that your kids are in the picture, your family's in the picture, I know for me it was a big change when Tony came into my life, and then especially when Azzy came into my life, quickly realizing that like things that I thought were like kind of normal weren't. So I think listening to like your intuition, but also realizing like the fear that you have about somebody else being treated the way that you're being treated is a pretty clear indicator that you're not being treated
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, there could be multiple red flags that it might be
Mhm.
necessary. And I think you make a good point. Like when boundaries are never respected, when the relationship is causing you from being healthy or present in your own life, or like you said, fearing for your kids or your spouse or whoever. And honestly, just like what like we talked about earlier, leaving you anxious, leaving you drained, questioning your worth. Like there can be so many different ways that red flags can come up. So it's definitely
Yeah.
like listen to your like Hoff said, listen to your intuition, listen to your gut. If you're like this doesn't feel right, it probably isn't, you know?
Or even if you're not like a clear indicator this doesn't feel right, but it just feels off, like you
Yeah.
feel our by instinct, our bodies change and react. It's like the gut feeling, right? Like
Mhm.
listen to your gut. But I think that's a really great thing with family is I feel like we usually tend to like overlook the way that we're
Mhm.
feeling differently around people. But I know for me personally, the moment that I see your name pop up and I get that little feeling in my stomach that's like, oh, I'd rather not talk to you on the phone right now.
Yeah.
Or I mean, I'm a Sagittarius. So if you're into horoscopes, the moment that I'm like, no, like it's a dread to talk to you, it's usually because of something toxic in my body rejecting like or not even fearing, but yeah, rejecting the conversation. So I think listening to your body, even if your brain is convincing you, again, gaslighting.
Mhm.
Your brain will convince you that you're wrong. I know there has been times, especially with you, Aleea, where you're like, I need somebody who's not in this situation to tell
Mhm.
me if I'm reading this wrong or if
Right. Am
I'm
I being crazy
reacting
or
it to it. Yeah, like, am I crazy or am I valid in feeling like
right.
bitch is crazy?
Yeah.
No, but seriously, am I valid in thinking that like this is not the way I should be
Mhm.
treated? Because your brain might convince you like, oh, like, well, XYZ, but as soon as your body is like, I'm not feeling right, then I think that's a very clear indicator that things need to be assessed.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree, and I think that's so true. Because yeah, your brain might not be catching up, but your body definitely can give you indicators, and I know for me, it was a mixture of all of these things, all of the flags, all of the not all the signs, but, like, I just was like, I'm feeling icky every time I'm leaving, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stressed out, like, it feels like you're walking on eggshells because 'cause you're like, "Oh, no, is this gonna be misconstrued?" And so, yeah, I felt like there was just a time where I finally was like, "Okay, I'm enough of feeling this way. It's time to finally put myself and my family's peace above other people, especially because these people clearly aren't caring about yours. So it's like, why are we continuing to spend so much energy towards something that they honestly, obviously don't care about? And so I think that kind of takes us into if it is like maybe you are thinking about cutting ties, what can that look like? And I know Hav mentioned it earlier. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Like
Mhm.
you can do low limited contact or no contact. Like you can try your best to preserve the relationship as much as you can. Especially if you feel comfortable doing, no one can decide for you what's enough. Like when enough is
Mhm.
enough. So start with small boundaries before fully cutting someone off. I know Hav, you could probably talk a little more about how you did this, in your own personal life.
Yeah, I know for me, I mean, I put up and, you figure out when it's right, but, for me and I was young when the particular situation happened, so it was really hard for me actually to figure out what to do and how to do it because I was literally, like, 18 and, like, figuring out my life,
Mhm.
but after, like, time and time, like, I think my body and, like, I didn't want to be around my dad when he was upset because I knew that it was gonna lead to me kind of having to sit there and talk to him and be that, like, emotional bag for him or whatever, and, like, I think a lot of us see that with our parents all the time, but for me, it got to a point where I was like, "Well, this is clearly, like, this is things that, like, you need to talk to your friends about or you need to go
Mhm.
therapy about," and so, eventually, I think and it was easier for me because when in my family, when you turn 18, like, dad kind of just stops helping you with everything. So I was like, okay, you're not paying my bills, you're not doing stuff. So I do have to recognize like how hard it can be to cut off certain toxic behaviors. But it got to the point where I was like, hey, like I will figure out what I need to figure out on my own. You can't talk to me about these things because I'm your daughter. If you're going to tell me that I'm a child, then treat me like a child, things like that. And a lot of it was just communication. My dad's like hard of hearing. Not actually hard of hearing, but he likes
Selective
to think
hearing.
yeah, he thinks he's right about a lot of things, and we've talked about this, and he's doing so great in recognizing a lot of things, but that came from his children being like, "Hey, yo, like, this is not okay," to when we were in college, a big blowout with Tony. We just,
Yeah.
don't know. But I knew in my gut that I was with, like, the man that I wanted to be with, and he was right for me, and my dad disrespected him, and then proceeded to send me an email basically being like, you're basically saying I was a heathen. So I just responded to him and I was like, hey, like that was enough. I'm not going to sit in a room and be told that I'm something that I'm not. I'm pretty strong in my convictions of who I am. So I responded to the email and basically was like, hey, here's the boundary.
Mhm.
You can keep your personal thoughts to yourself. Your opinion is valid for you. However, don't talk to me about it. Don't come to him about it. And be respectful when I'm in the room. If you can't do that, I will just stop coming to family events.
Yeah.
And for him, that was enough because he didn't want to lose his relationship with me, but that's not always enough for some people. So I think that was a great first step, and I would always suggest speaking to people in a way that they understand. Because with him, if it was an option, then we would have continued. But I, put that this is what's going to happen, and if it doesn't happen, this is what you can expect. Don't expect to see me at family events. Don't expect me to talk to you. Don't expect me to respect you the way that you would if you're not gonna respect me. Like, we're
Mhm.
adults here. So
Yeah, I think you brought up or what you said was a few good points for helping, the process of letting go, which is one, having conversations. You don't have to silently step away. Like, and obviously you can pick and choose what feels best for you. Like sometimes it's like with Hop, it's worth having the conversation with them, letting them know, hey, this is what's happening. And maybe they will be finally willing to work on it, because they see you're serious and they're like, okay, like I do want to keep my kids in their life or whatever. So I'm going to take these steps to do it. But like Hop said, sometimes, no matter what you say or do, it's not going to help. And it kind of goes in one ear, out the other. And sometimes it is best to eliminate communication. And we'll get more into that in a minute. But the other
and
thing
I
I
would
think you
say
what go ahead.
sorry to cut you
No,
off.
you're
I
good.
think that's a really good indicator that the person is truly toxic.
Yes, I
With my
agree.
dad, it was honestly, like, he has a lot of toxic behavior, but it was a mistake. He
Right.
didn't really realize what he was doing. If the person truly loves you, when you put that boundary up, they're gonna reassess.
Mhm.
If they're not reassessing,
Yeah,
but
100%. I think Hav no, that's a great point. I'm glad that you said that because it is true. If they're put and I guess this kind of actually goes into another point. I'll come back to my other one, but especially that they are toxic, but it's also be prepared for pushback, guilt, things like that, because I'm like, especially if they are someone that maybe doesn't respect you or is, you're questioning, like, do they really care? This is something that they can do, but also other family members. Like I said, if they're telling people like, no, this is actually what's happening, and they believe them over maybe your story, because it can be hard when there is two sides and they're both family members and that people love both parties. It can be hard for them to truly grasp your reasoning. And so, yeah, I think just remember that that's something that you can also experience. It's like not only might they not respect and they are probably toxic, but you might also get pushback. So just remember to speak on it, let them know your boundaries, and you can tell other people, other family members your boundaries too. Like, hey, by the way, I'm just distancing myself because of this. I've personally done that. Like, hey, I'm not going to come to this event because of, such and such. And that's whatever. You're just going to have to you're allowed to set boundaries. And so don't forget to speak on them. And then also remind yourself that not everyone will get it. It's like what Hav said. They just might not understand, and in the end, you need to make the best decision for you and your family, and kind of what I said in the last, I don't know, maybe it was a couple episodes ago, let people be wrong about you.
Mhm.
Like, unfortunately, like, in the end, people are gonna believe what they wanna believe, even if you have all of the evidence and things like that, and so hopefully the truth will prevail, but sometimes that doesn't happen, and you still need to take the best, course of action for yourself. But just to backtrack a little bit, the other thing I was going to say that I think you made a good point on is definitely create a support system for yourself. So if you don't
Mhm.
have family or people in your corner, definitely do that, whether it's therapy or
Mhm.
friends or chosen family or whatever it is. Definitely consider additional support just because you shouldn't have to go through this alone, and you can chat about it with them. Like Hav said, like what I do with her, sometimes you need an outside party to kind of help
Yeah.
balance.
I agree. I mean, I come to you and I think the same thing is, I mean, for anything, but 100% is having that outside perspective because I also feel like, especially with the pushback and the guilt
Mhm.
of if they can get other people on their side,
Right.
things like that, I think it's really helpful to be able to reach out and say, "Hey, like I said earlier, like, am I crazy? Like, is this
Mhm.
something that I'm reading into or whatever?" I have a lot of, like, toxic family stuff that's, like, just borderline red flag to where I'm like, "Okay, well, we kinda keep letting it happen," but I know I come to you all the time and I'm like, "This is ridiculous. Please tell me that you think this is ridiculous too, because if not, then I need to maybe I'm the problem." And I always feel like the problem. Like, it's just like the mom guilt thing,
Right.
right? Like,
Well, and
I'm
that's
the
where I
issue.
think it comes back to like societal cultural kind of aspect. It's like women just tend, I think, to feel more guilty about things like that because it's
Mhm.
almost like our job to keep the family unit like
Yeah.
together. And so it can just
One
feel, yeah.
exactly, like, everything's our fault. But and I too, because I know this isn't something that you or I necessarily deal with our kids, but I see a lot of the red flag behavior of like my parents watch my children and I ask them not to feed them certain foods or do certain things or whatever, and they're constantly going against what I say.
Mhm.
And like, when does that turn from like, oh, it's just grandparents being grandparents to being like an actual really red flag? And I think that's important to bring up too, because
Yeah.
of course we're a mom podcast, right? So like,
Mhm.
at what point does like, oh, cute little, oh, but I'm the grandparent, like I'm supposed to give him sugar. When does that become something that's like, okay, now we need to cut this off? But then again, it's affecting your life
Mhm.
because if parents are watching the grandkids and that's like your support system, it can
Mhm.
get really tricky, is
Yes.
basically what I'm saying. And we're not saying that like there's a right and a wrong way to do things,
Mhm.
and it can be really difficult. I mean, especially in situations like that, I think trying to be as clear on boundaries as you can be. And I know this sound like, but like not an empty threat, but like, or threat, not the right word maybe, but letting them know that like if this continues, you'll have to do what you have to do to figure out a new care system for them or whatnot. Uh,
Mhm.
but it can be as small as grandparents refusing to listen to your boundaries about if you have a schedule for your kid's nap, or if they're dye free, or if they're gluten free or dairy free, or you don't want them watching certain TV or listening to certain music. There are boundaries there that can quickly become you're disrespecting me and you're making my child's life doesn't seem unsafe, but really scary behaviors can come from certain diets for certain kids and stuff like that. So I definitely want to call that out as well.
I think that is a really, really good addition because it is so true. It's not always just the stuff towards you and your family. Like, it could get deeper to people just not respecting how you're raising your kids.
Mhm.
And even going out of their way to do things like maybe they don't ask you permission for things, or like they're just doing sly things behind your back. And maybe you don't know until your kid's like, oh, by the way, we did this, you know? And it's kind of like that's also, yeah, can definitely, you definitely hit the realm of toxic and like red flag because, and I think that's a good time though when you start doing the process of communicating, like Hob said, setting the boundaries. Maybe you start talking to people being like, "Is this something that you think is a little extreme? Am I being over the top about it? Maybe this is something serious." And then, maybe you do start taking steps if they aren't respecting it to, maybe you aren't fully cutting ties, but you're starting to limit the contact, or just you're changing things and maybe they'll start to get it. And if not, maybe that is the time you cut off. So I think it is a good point because it's not just, there can be a lot of different ways that these red flags can pop up when it comes to your family, especially when it comes to your kids. So, it just may be difficult, but you'll be amazed at how much peace you'll feel, life after you start cutting toxic ties or even limiting your contact or however you want to set your boundaries. Once you really start doing this, you'll be amazed how much space that leaves you to actually heal. Like you're really
Mhm.
starting to break the cycles for your own children, for yourself, and you don't have to go through the same cycles. So it just makes you really strong and it's not easy to do. And so, if there were more people, like if it was easy to heal from generational trauma, everyone would be healed. And so
Yeah.
just remember, you are not alone. If you're just personally dealing with this, like I've learned that not every battle is worth fighting for. And some are, like Hav mentioned, there might be some that are worth clinging on to, setting
Mhm.
boundaries and trying to make it work. And sometimes there's just not. Like in my case, it's just easier for my mental health and my peace. Once it starts, like for me, when Ty and I sometimes start fighting over it and stuff, that's when, once it's affecting your home life and things like that, sometimes it is important to decide where your energy matters most. And for me, that's protecting my kids, protecting my peace, protecting my partner's peace, those types of things. And so it's time to kind of let go of the rest. And so just kind of remember, like cutting ties doesn't mean you don't love these people. It just means you love
Mhm.
yourself enough to protect all of that. And so you do deserve that. Hav, do you have any additional?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point on that, and honestly, sometimes cutting them off or creating those extra boundaries is actually what they need to
Mhm,
realize that they're not loving you the right way.
mhm,
Sometimes it works out, but I would say, like I always say, protect your peace, protect your family, you know what's best for you and your family, and if you're like me, like we've said, when you're noticing toxic behavior or whatever, you can start with start with boundaries and start with discussing it. um, I'm a big, like, I like to know that I did my best and I tried my best to create the best situation so that when it doesn't work out, or if it doesn't work out, then I feel not as guilty as, like, there's less things that could be on me. So, and I think you did that as well, is trying to figure out how you can make situations work. But like you said, once it gets to a point where there's arguments or
or like your
you're
boundaries
scared of,
aren't being respected, like I say,
yeah.
please leave me alone, and then you continue to not leave me alone, it's really hard to want to continue trying to
Yeah.
make things work.
When I think too, like, I know we're wrapping up, but that's a good point of, like, when you cut somebody off and they still don't respect the boundary of not talking to you anymore. Sometimes you do have to lead into being as drastic as blocking people and
Mhm,
not attending events that they're at. So that's something to consider when you are thinking of these things. But yeah, protect your peace 100%. If it's causing you anxiety or taking over your life, then it is important. It's like, self-care. That's a
yeah.
big self-care piece.
Yeah. And so if this is something you are dealing with and you aren't sure how to set a boundary, like Hob said, you could start small, maybe start creating space between you and them. For example, maybe you've been doing a lot of direct contact, you see them every day and stuff, and that feels really draining. Start setting up a different way to interact. Maybe you just text, or maybe you meet in a public place instead of your house, just limiting your visits to a set time frame. So, and then if none of that's working and you're like, no, I'm at the next step, where it's like I'm ready to cut them off, definitely consider that conversation and then start taking those steps. Maybe it is time to just cut ties. And so definitely do what you need to do for your peace. Like it's like what Hav said, do what's best for your family. So with that said, stick around for the next episode. It's going to be covering matricence, which is a new term that we just learned about, but we definitely think it's worth talking about. It's kind of what happens to your identity when you become a mom. So it's not just hormones, it's like the whole transformation. And again, we will dive into it next week. And I know we have felt this from day one, and I'm sure you have too. So stick around, stay tuned for that for next week. Bye.
Bye.